Hey, welcome to the second episode of Ultra Modular Inventory and Interaction System. I'm here in the interaction system project that we had from before. I would do, if I were you, I would make a copy of the project from before. That way you have a base interaction system that you can migrate to different projects as needed. And we can turn this one into the inventory system, the interaction and inventory system. And that way moving forward, if you need just an interaction system and something, you can migrate that, the one from the previous episode. And if you need, an inventory and interaction system, you can migrate this one that we're about to do. I want to make one change in this one before we get started. And that's, I was thinking about this, and in our, interactables in range trace, we define this channel that we're looking for, and we really should make this a variable. And drag that up maybe. And we can actually I'm going to make a category called defaults with an S and just throw all the ones that we've enabled instance editable in there. And maybe I probably wasn't clear enough on that from before. If we go into our third-person character blueprint, we can click on this interaction, and under defaults, now we have all the settings. And so whenever you migrate this into a new project, you'll be able to just define all the things you want to do for it. For instance, like the radius and the tick rate and the debug settings and all that. All right, so inventory. Let's get on to our inventory. The first thing we're going to do, go into our ultramodular int and end system, components, item container. This is our inventory master container. And actually, let's go into our data. Let's go into our data folder. Sorry, I was looking for it and I couldn't find it. I was like, wait, what? Let's go into our structures and create a blueprint structure and call it inventory slot. Double click that, and this will open. And I'm gonna make two variables, one of gameplay tag, call it item tag, and next call it item quantity of type integer. Boom, and back in our item container component, I will create a inventory variable of type s_inventory slot. And if we right click on it, we can make it an array, and we can click that instance editable button. Okay, and I'm going to create a couple more variables. First one is an integer of type, max inventory size, and make that instance editable. I'm going to duplicate that and call it max row size, which is something we'll use in the UI when we get to it. And then I'm going to make a Boolean of resize inventory and make that instance editable as well. And so we can delete event tick for now. And on event begin play, we're going to drag out resize inventory, make a branch. And while I'm thinking about it, we can actually make this true by default. And then we will drag our inventory array out and resize it to our max size, which we'll set to maybe 25 for now. So the way we're going to do this is not necessarily typical of how you would work with arrays in Unreal Engine, but basically, in most cases, we're going to populate the inventory from the beginning with nothing. So slots right here, when it resizes it, it will create these inventory slots, but nothing will be in them. And we're doing that so when we pull up our inventory, it won't just be empty with no squares. For instance, if you press tab in a game and it pulls up the inventory and you have 25 squares, that is your inventory basically. But it'd be like, if we didn't do this, it would almost be like if you had one inventory item, you would just see one square. Or if you had 5 inventory items, you would just see 5 squares. Doing it this way, it will create the max amount that we allow in this inventory in this specific instance of this component. It will create it off the rip. It will create like 25 squares in our inventory basically. And then it will double back and fill the ones that have something in them. So I found this way is the best way to do it when you're doing it that way. Okay, and we should have this try add item to inventory from before, and which was just printing the items that we interacted with. We're gonna, while I'm thinking about it, we can add a return node for success ? And I'm gonna just put that right here for now. And then we can get started on this. So let's think about what happens when we try to add an item to inventory. So the first thing we want to check is if we already have that item in inventory. And unfortunately, because we're working with an array as an inventory, if we just do find item, it won't really work because there are two items right here. So we're going to have to create a helper function to decide if we have an item that exists in our inventory, that is the item that we're trying to add. So let's see, does item exist in inventory? And we can say gameplay tag, item tag, and we'll basically get our inventory and for each loop with break. And it's going to loop over all the entries in our inventory, and we're just going to see if it, oops, got to break it first. And it's just going to see if any of the items that we have, any of the entries that we have in this array, if the tag for that item matches the tag that is right here, which we can get by typing get item tag. There we go. Plug that in there. We want an exact match. And if it does exist, we're going to say found item ? For a local variable. And then we will promote the index, found index, local. And we'll actually promote the quantity, found quantity. And then we will break out of this loop when we are ready. And once we've completed this, going through all these and checking, we will return. Now, a good way to debug stuff like this is to actually do a branch on whether or not we found the item. And we're going to drag this like always. So let's do this. I just dragged it. I just dragged that there so it would make an output, and we can click on it for true and then uncheck it for false. And we're gonna, if it's true, we're gonna just drag the index that we found and the quantity into true. But if it's false, we're gonna put both of these as -1. And that way, if you ever see something pop up as -1, you know that something has gone wrong. You know, some error has occurred, most likely. And I'm gonna click on this and make it a pure function. And we can go back to our try add items inventory. And first thing we want to see is, does this item exist? Okay. And if so, oh wait, we need one more variable actually. One more default variable in the item container component, which is going to be our let me see if I can't remember if we delineated that in the asset. Yeah, we did max stack size. Okay, cool. So we don't need that variable. Let's see. Okay, there we go. And so if we do find an item, so we're trying to pick up an item, it already exists in our inventory. What do we want to do? Well, we want to get the quantity. So we're going to have to see what is the quantity we're going to set it at. It's new quantity. Get new quantity. And let's see, we need, or actually we can just say current quantity in quantity, and max stack size. So 3 inputs, all of type integer, and in here, and we should be able to get new quantity. Let's make it a pure function. Here we go. All right, cool. And so now we can, well, we have the item tag right there. So we can get item tag. And remember, we have our blueprint function library function for get item data by tag. And we know this item is found because we found it right here. Say get max stack size, and the end quantity is going to be get item quantity, and the current quantity, I'm just going to promote this current to a local variable, just because we're going to change it. We're going to change the current quantity, so I want to remember this number. Because after this, we're going to set the new quantity, and there may be some Unreal Engine may get confused because we're asking for the quantity here, and it may end up giving us the new quantity we set as this quantity. So I just want to save this before we start changing it. So that's going to be the current quantity right here. Then we can get into this function, and so we have, well, actually, instead of end quantity, let's say quantity to add. So we have our current quantity and we have our quantity to add. First thing we want to see is current quantity and quantity to add. If they are less than or equal to our max stack size. And if it is less than or equal to our max stack size, then we can return that number. Okay, but if it's not, that means it's going to be greater. And so in that case, how would we get our what we can add, basically? Because we want to, if it's going to be greater than our max stack size, that means we need to just add however many we can add, however many we are able to add. So if we get our max stack size and we subtract our current quantity, that should tell us exactly how many we'll be able to add before we go over the max stack size. And later down the road, we'll have a Boolean here. We'll create a Boolean here, and we'll have to, for instance, if we may want to, if we pick up more, for instance, if we drag an item from a chest to our inventory, and when we combine that item into one slot, it goes over the max stack size, we may want to automatically create a slot. And so we may need to do some additional math here eventually, but for now, this will be it. So we have our new quantity, and we have the index for the item we're trying to change right there. So we're just going to get this and set array element. And we have the index right here. And if we make item, we can get the new quantity, and we can get this item tag. And let's create an event dispatcher for inventory updated. And actually, we'll probably need to, let's say, and call that dispatcher right here. And that's just because later on, we're going to need to call an event for this. And we can't call event dispatcher events with just the dispatcher alone. So we'll set this up to where just in case we need to call an event, we'll be able to call that event that just calls the dispatcher. So we'll say on inventory updated. Cool. All right. And so now we need to do the false, which is the false would be if we're picking up a new item. So if the item doesn't already exist in our inventory, the next thing we would need to do is, well, if it doesn't already exist, tell me where to put it. So we need to find an empty slot. Find first empty slot. Let's create a new function called find first empty slot. We'll make it a pure function, and we will loop over our inventory with a break. We will break the structure. And so for each item in our inventory, for each like one of these slots that are created, we're going to see if I don't know if I usually do equals right here. If the item tag equals none, because if it equals none, that means it's empty. So if we promote this to a local variable, and we'll call it found empty slot question mark, and we'll just leave that as a check mark, and we'll get the index, promote that to a local variable, found slot index, and plug that up at the end, and then we will break it. And we're going to do the same trick as before. We'll do a branch after it's completed. And we will do that just to get a checkbox. And we'll say yes if it's true and false if it's no, but then we're going to drag our found slot index and make sure it's -1 on false. Excuse me. Okay. And so if the item isn't already in our inventory, we found an empty slot. And if we haven't found an empty slot, we can actually just return false here, but that should never happen. But if we have found an empty slot, we want to get this and set array element. We have the index right here. We have the item tag. And we have the item quantity. And actually, we should probably make sure, before we do that, let's just make sure that we have found the data, that it actually exists, which we know it exists, but just to be safe, because we know it exists because we wouldn't have called this function if it didn't exist. From our interaction inventory, we wouldn't have gotten this. From our interaction manager, we wouldn't have gotten this far if it didn't exist. And we'll get the max stack size, and we'll make sure this item quantity coming in is less than or equal to our max stack size, and that it exists. And if it does, we will add the item to our inventory. And I'm going to create a category for some of these functions and call it helper and put them into the helper functions. Let's create another function for print inventory. And we will drag out get our inventory, do a regular for each loop. We will break it. And if the item tag does not equal none, which means it is a valid slot with something actually in it, we'll get a print string. We'll append that. And off the item tag, we can say get tag name. And then in the B, we can add a colon with a couple spaces, add another pin, and then drag in the item quantity. And then we can add another default variable for our item container component, which is show debug. Mark it to true by default, and we can actually make a category for these variables called defaults, just like the last one, and just drag all those in. And so on try add item to inventory, if we want to show the debug, well, actually we need to call the on inventory updated first. Oops. And if we want to show the debug, we can print the inventory. And we'll duplicate that. Oops. And put it up here as well. And we will make a copy of our return node and just mark it as success. Cool. And actually, let's put a false return node right here. Cool. Okay. I think that's going to do it. Let's see. There we go. We have 5. Wait, this says 0. Okay, so let's actually do this. Because there may come an instance like this where an item is in the world and it has a quantity of 0, which we know to be impossible. So you see where, let's do this. Let's actually do that in our interaction component. Let's go to components, interaction manager, and let's go to try interact with item. And right here where we are trying to add the item to inventory, let's do a select off item quantity. And where is it? Item quantity is right there. So we want to see if this item quantity is not equal to 0, then we can just use the item quantity. But if it is, let's change it to 1. And that way almost everything will be 1 by default, pretty much. There we go. So let's see. So it's printing that one. And then we have that one. Cool. So that's working. Let's just go ahead and test if we pick up 2 of the same item. So we have the carrot. I'm waiting for it to disappear. We have that, and it's 10. Cool. And let's just change. Let's go 45. I'm changing the quantity to 45, and I'm going to change this one to 10. And it should stop me from picking the 10 one up. Yeah, I see it stopped me. I actually picked up the other thing because it's not letting me pick that up. Okay, cool. So we're going to need a couple more functions, basic functions for our item container component. And we want to make this first item container component. This is going to be the parent. I'm going to drag this print inventory into our helper category. We want to make this as generic as possible. So we can, there may be certain functionality that we need out of, I don't know, a storage box, for instance, like a storage container. But we want to make this as generic as possible because this is going to be the parent of all of them. And if we need that specific functionality, we can make a child of this component and then get super specific. But that actually reminds me, let's go to enumerate. Let's go to our data folder, go to enumerations, and let's create another enumerator. E_container type. We're going to need to know what type of container this is most of the time. We can say player inventory, player hotbar. We can say storage. We can say crafting station, production station. You can put whatever you want in there, but we will need to delineate the differences between them. And let's go to our item container component and make a variable called container type of the enumeration we just made. What container type, and make that instance editable and throw it in our defaults. And we'll make that player inventory by default. Cool. And we actually, let's make another helper function for get inventory length. Because remember, we're resizing our inventory to 25 at the beginning. So if we drag this array out and just type length, this won't be all the valid items in our inventory. It'll be all the total items in our inventory, even if some of them are not valid. So we need a function to just get the actual length of the length of the inventory array, that only including items that are actually valid. So let's create a local variable in this function for inventory slot and make it an array. I'm going to call it valid inventory. And basically we're going to loop over them. We're going to see if this does not equal does not equal none. And if it doesn't equal none, then we're going to add it to this valid array, this local variable. And when we return it, we're just going to get the length of this one. Valid inventory length, and then we can make this a pure function and throw it in our helper functions. And on try add item to inventory, let's get inventory length. Let's see. So when right before we add a new item, so on this false branch right here, we can just make sure the get inventory length is less than our max inventory size. Because if not, it's going to create a slot for, it might try to create a slot for something that we don't want because our max inventory size is whatever it is. And so we'll bring this false branch right here too. Okay, and we're only going to need a few more to get us started. Let's make one for remove item from inventory, which will need a couple inputs, which will be item tag, or let's say item to remove. Say quantity to remove. And we'll say drop item. We'll make a Boolean input for a drop item question mark. And we may want to have a Boolean for remove all. I can't think of an instance actually where we'd want to remove all of something. So let's stick with remove item from inventory. Let's create another function called drop item. And it'll need a item tag and a quantity to drop. And so when we drop an item, we're going to get our item tag. Oops. Yeah, we need that actually. But we want to get our item tag, which is just this input we created. And assuming that the data exists, we want to get the class. And we want to spawn actor from class. And actually, let's go into our test items. And we're going to want to, okay, we have that as exposed on spawn. Well, let's go into our interfaces folder. And BP item, let's create a function for set quantity. And then add input for a new quantity of type integer. And in our test items, we can double click on the set quantity and then just set our item quantity as that. I'm going to do that to all our test items. And that way we can dynamically set the quantity so we don't spawn a bunch of items at once. We can just spawn one blueprint with, multiple items in it. So to get the spawn transform, to get the location we want to spawn the item at, we're going to get the owner of this component, which is going to be our player in this case. And we're going to say get actor location. We're going to drag off a get owner and get actor forward vector. And let's multiply it and right click, convert this to a float. And so we want to, I'm thinking maybe 200. We want to spawn this item right in front of the player, but maybe about 200 units in front of them. And we'll add this to the actor location, and we'll actually put an offset of maybe 50 units, maybe 100 units. So it's 100 units. Otherwise, you might not be able to see it be spawned. So with this formula, it'll be about 200 units in front of the player and 100 units above it. So you'll actually be able to see it spawn. And then we can pull off of this return value and get our set quantity and connect that quantity to drop. Cool. And if we go back to our remove item from inventory, let's see. We actually already have does item exist in inventory? We can get item to remove. This is the same function that we used right here. Does item exist? And our try add item to inventory. So we'll create a branch. If we found the item, that means it does exist in our inventory. And we have the quantity to remove right here. So found quantity minus get quantity to remove. And we'll promote this to a local variable because we're going to change it in a sec. And let's actually clamp this at 0. Well, we shouldn't need to clamp it actually. Yeah, let's clamp it. Just in case it doesn't go beyond 0. Now the max will be this found quantity. And when we clamp it, it won't give us a value that's above the max or below the minimum. So we can use the found quantity as the maximum because we know that'll be the max when we're subtracting from it. Okay, and so that's our quantity to remove. And so we are going to set array element. Now let's actually, while I'm thinking about it, we can hold S and click and get a sequence. And this will be our first sequence, our then 0 in the sequence. We have the index right here. Get item to remove. We're gonna, quantity to remove right there. And so we're finding the item if it exists in our inventory, and then we're just taking the found quantity and subtracting the quantity to remove, making sure it's not below 0, and then we're setting the array item where that item was found. We're setting the item to be the new quantity, which is the found quantity minus the quantity to remove. And then for then 1, we just need to do a branch. And if we want to drop this item, because there'll be a lot of cases where we want to remove items from our inventory, but we do not want to drop the item. For instance, if we're crafting something, we want to just remove the item. We don't want to drop it. It'll just basically, get deleted. And so if we want to drop our item, we just go drop item and get our item to remove and get our quantity to remove local. I should actually change this because I'm realizing this local variable has the same name as this. And that's why I always like to do the local in parentheses, but just to say, let's say cached quantity to remove, just so we know what's going on. Okay, cool. I'm going to create another category called main and throw these in there. And I'm going to throw the drop item in helper. Okay, cool. I think that should be it. Let's maybe debug this a little. Oh, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, we want to, first of all, if it has reached 0, if the cache quantity to remove has reached 0, we want to invalidate the slot. So we'll do a select off an item and we'll see if it's equal to 0 or not. And if it is equal to 0, we'll just leave it blank. Basically, we'll do a make and just leave it blank. But if it isn't equal to 0, then we will set it with our new stuff. If that makes any sense. And let's just do that. All right, cool. And we can, let's actually drag our on inventory updated. We'll drag it there as well at the end of that. Yeah, we can do our show debug as well. If show debug is true, then we will print the inventory. Cool. I mean, that's a couple functions and that should be all set up, and we just need to do the visuals next. Let's get our, where is it? Third person blueprints, third person character. We have our interact enhanced input, but let's just do debug key 1. I'm going to just do a quick debug. You see right here on this container. Cool. Okay. And let's say I'm going to put, for our max row size, let's put 5 for now. All right. And item container. Remove item from inventory. Let's go back into our item container real quick. Create a new function for get random valid item. And I'm going to do a for each loop. Do the same thing, valid inventory local. And I'm going to break this. And if this does not equal none, I'm going to add it to here. I'm going to add it in this filtered, this valid inventory array. And at the end, when the loop is completed, we're just going to drag this out and random array item. And that'll be handy for debugging. Drag that into the helper category, go back to our third person character, get random valid item. There we go. And so that'll happen. So when we press the 1 key, it's going to get a random valid item. And I'm just going to tell it that's the item to remove. And then that's the quantity to remove. But I'm realizing that if we go back to our remove from inventory, we need to actually, if this is equal to a variable, we need to promote that to a variable, which will be, no, that actually wouldn't have anything to do with the drop item. We should be good. So let's see. So if we pick up these items and we press 1, there we go, boom. But I did that a little fast, so let's see. So we have 10 carrots and 1 steamed veggie. I'm going to press 1. Now we have 8 steamed veggies, 6 for... Oh, it looks like if you do it fast... No, okay. Yeah, okay, perfect. It's just the debug is not really cool. And just to make sure, we can actually just do once. We can put that in our, and then for the third, we can just reset it. So we got 10 carrots. There we go, cool. And let's make our last function, which will probably be the most complicated. Switch item slots, we'll call that. And this is going to be for our drag and drop purposes. We're going to need an item container component for an input, and we're going to put this as source item container component. We're going to need an index for source item index and target item index. And we will promote these to a local variable. So source item container component. Oh, source item container component local. Source item index local. Target item index local. Excuse me. And then we're going to get our source item, do a get inventory. Yeah, we'll get the inventory for this source. Get a copy. And we'll promote this to a local variable, source item local. And then we'll get this inventory component, do a get copy, the target, promote to local variable. This will be target item local. And we'll actually, let's do a sequence. So we cache all those variables and then we start on our calculations. Okay, and when we're basically dragging and dropping, we're basically going to just switch the slots more or less. So the first thing we need to do is we have a target item and a source item. Now the source item means it's the item that you are clicking on and dragging and is coming to the target slot, if that makes any sense. So when it's coming to the target slot, it's going to be this container that we're inside of. So if we set array element for this slot, which will be the target index, we want the source item. And real quick, before we do that, we want to see if these match. Oh no, I don't think, actually that shouldn't matter. So let's just do this for now. We have the target inventory being set as the source item. Now we just need the source. Oh, now we just need the, get inventory. Now we just need the source item. We need to set it as the target. Source item, the source index, and we want the target item. Now, we know the source can't be empty because we'd have to click on something to be able to drag it. But if the target is empty, we want to set the source as empty. So when we set the source, we're going to say, let's see. When we set the source, we're going to see if this equals none. We'll do a select off of item. See if this equals none. And if it does equal none, we're going to just leave it blank basically. But if it doesn't, there we go. Yeah, so either way, we're setting it as the target. So I think we should be fine. Let's just delete all that and do that for now because we can't even test it. So let's just leave it like that for now. And then we want to get our on inventory updated, but we want to call it for this target inventory that we're inside of and also this source inventory. And we probably should have waited to do this function because we can't even test it right now. But when we get the UI up and running, we'll be able to test it. And it seems complicated, but it's really not that bad. So let's move on to the UI. In our ultra modular int and inventory in the components, let's create a actor component of UIManager component. And then let's make a folder for UI. Make another folder for widgets. And right here, if you right click, go to user interface, you have a widget blueprint. We want this user widget. We'll create one for player display. And how I like to do things is create a folder called screens. And we'll say w_screen player HUD. This will be like your health, your hotbar, stuff like that. Duplicate it, underscore, where is it? Yeah, w_screen player inventory. I'm gonna drag the screens in there. So basically this player display will be the parent for everything that pops up on the player screen. So in this player display, we're gonna drop a canvas panel. I'm gonna call it player display canvas. I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna wrap it with a size box. I'll call it player display size box. We're gonna check the width and height override, and I'm just gonna go 1920 by 1080. I'm gonna wrap the size box with a scale box next. And that is a little trick just to basically make sure that we're setting the ratio that all screens are, basically the 16 by 9. And then we're just scaling everything inside of this by that. So it should basically make it to where no matter what screen you're viewing it on, or one of your players is viewing what you're doing on, it'll be basically the way you intend it to be, more or less. It'll look the way you intend it to look. And just to make sure, let's create another widget. User widget w_crosshair. And in here, I'm just going to add an image and then wrap it in a size box. I'm going to rename the widget crosshair image and rename the size box crosshair image size box. And I'm going to set them both to maybe 7.5 by 7.5. And I'm going to go into the player HUD. And I'm going to, first I'm going to add a border. I'm going to say player HUD border. And in here in the brush settings, we can just change it to draw as none. And up here in the top right, we can say desired on screen. Instead of drawing the whole screen, it's just gonna show us what's actually in this widget. So I'm going to type overlay and drag the overlay onto the border. Say player HUD overlay. And then I'm going to get our crosshair. There we go. And that's just so we can easily test if it's working or not. And so inside our player display, I'm going to drag our HUD. Going to center it. Type 0, 0 for the positions. Make sure your alignment is 0.5 and 0.5, and then select size to content. And then there's our crosshair. Cool. And if we go into our components, go into UIManager. On begin play, we want to create a widget. And it's going to be the player display widget. We'll promote it to a variable. Player display widget ref. And actually, let's unhook this and create a custom event for initialize player display. And let's make sure if we drag this player display widget ref and right click it, we can just convert it to a validated get. And we only want to create this if it's not already created. We can drag this variable out and add it to the viewport. There we go. And we'll create another custom event for initialize player HUD. And our player HUD, if we go into let's go into our widgets and go into player display. We'll go into our player HUD and search for visibility and switch it to collapsed so it is not visible by default. Go into our UIManager component, initialize player HUD. We will get our player display widget, convert it to a validated get, make sure it's valid, and we will get our player HUD and set the visibility to visible. Let's call it actually display player HUD, and we can actually duplicate this and create another custom event for hide player HUD. We should almost never need to hide it, but just to say. And so when we initialize our player display, we want to display player HUD. And on event begin play, we can initialize player display. Oops. Okay, we can go into our blueprints folder and our game folder. Let's create a player controller and call it pp_my player controller. I'm going to open this up and I'm going to add our UIManager component. And I'm doing it that way because that will make it to basically anywhere in Unreal Engine we can type get player controller, and then we can just do a get component by class and be able to access our UI. I find this to be a very good way to do it because it makes it accessible inside the widgets, inside the player, inside the components. I mean, it's pretty much accessible that way throughout all of Unreal Engine. So we just need to actually, in our blueprints folder and our game folder again, let's create a game mode base, pp_my game mode base. Double click that, and we just need to create this to set our player controller as the player controller. Boom. And if we go into edit, project settings, maps and modes, we have our default maps, and right here it says default game mode, my game mode base. Yeah, cool. And everything's working. It's just we just changed the player controller basically to be ours right here. And so if we play, I didn't even notice if it was working or not. Yeah, you see it's working because we can see our crosshair. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see the crosshair right there. So the widgets are coming on the screen just like we want. Let's go into our UIManager component, and I'm just going to comment this stuff. What was that? Initialize player display. Display player HUD. Hide player HUD. Cool. Alrighty. Okay, now we can go into our widgets. I'm gonna create a new folder called inventory. And we're basically gonna we're gonna try to make a super modular system with this to where we're really only gonna be able to we're gonna try to use two widgets, a grid widget and an item widget. And we're gonna try to use those for every variation of a grid that will need like a crafting system, storage, hotbar, inventory. We're going to try to just use those two widgets and see if we can make it work. So we're going to create the first user widget and call it w_item, and w_ for the next one, duplicate the item, and w_item grid. Now the first one we'll need to mess with is the item widget. I typically like to start stuff with a border just because you can set it to none and it comes in handy. I also like to switch this to desired on screen and then uncheck that because that usually gets in my way, these little dotted lines it likes to put. And I like to start everything with a border and an overlay, just because odds are if you go back and want to style stuff, it's typically easier to do it with a border because you have a lot of flexibility, and an overlay so you can put background images and stuff like that. And I'm going to change this to item border and change this to item overlay. Now, the next thing we want to get is a button and an image. And we want to drag the image above the button on the in the overlay. And if we go to item border, we can zero out the padding. And same for item overlay, we can zero out the padding. And I'm going to rename the image to background image. I'm going to zero out the padding for that as well. And the button has none. So cool. And we can center the button and we can call it item button. And we can actually get a text box or just text right here and drag it on the button and put item secondary text. We'll zero out the padding for that and put it in the bottom right. And we will drop down the font and put it to maybe 12. Yeah, put it to italic or maybe like 10. And we'll actually wrap the border with a size box. Rename it item size box. Make sure it's a variable. Width and height override to 100. Let's start with 100 for now. And it looks like we're going to need to do the alignment for fill horizontally and fill vertically for the item box and the background image. Cool. And for our text box, we just want this to be 0, 0. Cool deal. All right. And so if I'm just trying to make sure everything doesn't have padding, which it doesn't look like it does. Let's just make sure our secondary text is a variable. Cool. Sorry. All right. So we have our item, and this is going to serve. I'm going to just mute this item button real quick and go to the background image. I'm just going to make this like an off-white kind of. And then I'm going to turn back on the button. You see how they kind of match? That's not necessary, but I just wanted to change it. And so let's go into our graph. That's going to be good for now. Let's delete all this. And we're going to need a couple variables in here. First one is going to be item tag of type gameplay tag. Make that. We're actually going to make that instance editable. We're actually going to expose it on spawn as well. We're going to need an item index. Same thing. Expose it on spawn and make it instance editable. Item quantity. Same thing. Expose on spawn and make it instance editable. Parent container. Parent container component. Item container. Yeah, make sure we expose it on spawn. And I'm going to throw all these in a category called defaults. Should be good for now. We're going to create a custom event called set item data. And we're going to create a couple more custom events. One called invalidate. Invalidate item. And validate item. Or let's say on invalid, on item invalid, on item valid. So on our set item data custom event, we want to take our tag, make sure it's not equal to none. Or actually we can just do get item, get item. And if the data is found, we want to on item valid. And if the item is not found, we want to on item invalid. And that way we'll know, because like I said, we're going to have, so the grid is going to go through and it's going to create an item in our inventory grid. It's going to create a slot, whether there's something in the slot or not. Because remember at the beginning, it's getting resized to the quantity we set in our max inventory size. So it's going to create one of these item widgets every time for every slot that we set, and some of them are going to be empty. So now we can delineate what to do when it's an empty item and what to do when it's an actual item. So when it's an empty item, we want to get the button and set the visibility to collapse. And we want to set the secondary text to the same, to collapse. And then we can just copy these, because if it's valid, we want to set this to visible. And whether we want the secondary text to be visible is going to depend on what kind of container type it is. So if we switch on container type, we'll do this at the end of everything, but we're definitely going to want it for player inventory. We're going to want to make that visible. And then we want to set the text for it, which is going to be our item quantity. And then we're going to drop this down, which happens when you connect an integer to a text. And we want to make the minimum integral digits to 2. And that'll make it any number come in as 2 digits instead of 1. So when an item is valid, we're going to set the style for our button. And off of the end style, we can make button style. And off of normal, we can drag off and make slate brush. And we'll drag this in for hovered, pressed. Yeah, normal, hovered, and pressed. So when an item is actually valid, we're going to need to get the data and get the icon that we set for this item. And then set it as the image for our buttons brush. And then we can go ahead and set the secondary text to visible and then set that as well. And then we can get event pre-construct, which is basically like the construction script for widgets, and just plug in our set item data. And you see it has realized that there is no valid data for this tag, and it has made our button invisible more or less. And so let's just say if we switch this tag to mushroom, there's our mushroom, and that's what it's going to look like. And you see the color didn't change. So we can so whatever color we make this background image is the color the item is going to be, because our images are transparent. They're alpha images. Our icons are images. They're just a picture with no background. So we can actually get this background image. Let me see. What was it? Background image. Can set the brush for this background image. And we can make slate brush. Yeah. Promote to variable, and we can say background color. And this will be the color that we set right here. It'll be the color of our squares. So I'm just going to bring it to black, basically more or less black, and put the alpha to 0.5. And it'll basically come in like that. And then you can do the same thing for draw as, for instance. We could say default draw as. Make that instance editable. I'm going to go to background color and put default. And then right here where it says margin, we can promote that. Default margin. I'm sorry, not margin, outline settings. Default outline settings. Oops. So if we go to default draw as, we can go to rounded box, and for our outline settings, we can change this to fixed radius and maybe do 5555. And you can see now it has rounded corners on the icon. We can even make that a little more drastic. And And then when we go ahead and set our button style, we won't have to plug these in because remember our icons are transparent, so it's showing the background image. Cool. All right, that's good for now. We can go ahead to our, let's actually just make this none like before. We can go to our item grid. Now for our item grid, we're gonna start the same way, kind of border. Say item grid border. Make sure we draw it as, where is brush, draw as none, yeah. Then we're gonna get an overlay, drag it down. Item grid overlay. We're actually gonna get a scroll box. Item grid scroll box. Let's make sure to put this on desired on screen. And I'm gonna get a uniform grid panel. Item grid panel. Cool. And we're actually going to, I'm gonna wrap the grid panel, item grid size box. In a size box, I'm gonna edit the width and height to be 500 width by, or maybe we can go 750 by 750. Try that. Cool, and we can go into the graph. Can delete all this for now. And let's create a custom event called build inventory grid. And it's gonna have an input of an item container component. And that's gonna tell the grid which inventory to build. Let's create 2 integers for current column. Duplicate that, current row. And right here, we'll make sure this is valid. If it is, we'll get the inventory, loop over it. Well, let's set these to 0 first. And I'm gonna try to explain this. This is a little complicated to explain, but I'm gonna do my best in just 1 sec once I get it all set up. And so this is gonna take our inventory and it's gonna loop over all the items. And for every item in the inventory, we wanna create that item widget. And then these are all the variables in the item widget that we set to expose on spawn. And we just need to plug these in. So the index, the quantity, and the tag. And we want to get, let's go back to our designer and make sure our grid panel is a variable. I'm going to get this grid panel after that and add child to uniform grid. What child do we want to add? We want to add this item widget that we just created. And it's going to ask us, a uniform grid panel is just basically like this grid background right here. It's just, if you can tell it what row and column to put things on. So we just want the current row and current column because that is going to change every time we run through this loop because we're about to change it. So basically it's going to start this looping over all our inventory items, and it's going to put the current row and column to 0 and 0. So it's going to spawn this item right here, which is 0 on the X and 0 on the Y. And then after it does that and it goes to the next item in our inventory, we're going to increment the column, which means we're going to add 1. So it's going to be on row 0, column 1. And then it's going to be column 2, column 3, column 4, all in the same row. And remember, we have this get max row size in our inventory in our item container component. So we want to see every time we go through this loop, we want to increment that column and see if it's greater than or equal to this max row size. And if it is, we're going to set it to 0 and then increment the row. And I believe we set this variable to 5. And so basically, if you imagine this grid as this grid, it'll start right here at 0, 0 on the column, 0 on the row. And then, so it's going to go through the first item in the inventory. It's going to put it right here, 0, 0. And then it's going to go through the next one. It's going to put it on this column, which is row 0, column 1. And then it's going to do that every time until the amount of columns that it's gone through is the number that we put right here, which is 5. So it's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's going to say, oh, wait, that's greater than or equal to this number. So then it's going to say increment the row. So now it's going to go to row 1 and it's going to put the column back to 0. So it's basically going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, spawn a new row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, spawn a new row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that will basically get us a grid of items. We just need to, let's create another custom event called refresh. Oops, sorry. Well, let's say build item grid, refresh item grid. We're going to get this grid panel and clear the children. And we're actually going to do that right here too. Clear children. Boom. Just in case we ever want to refresh it and when there's not, and we don't want to hook up this again. We want to do one more thing, which is, let's actually promote this to a variable item container component. And that way we can just do this. What? Let's see, I meant to just do that right there. Sorry, I'm just organizing this a little bit. And then this right here, get rid of that and put that. And then this inventory thing right here, get rid of that and do that. Cool. Oops. Cool. Okay, and once we've actually looped through all these items, we can get our item container component, assign on inventory updated, which is our inventory, which is the event that we call when we update, when we add or remove something from our inventory. At the end of that, we always called this this on inventory updated event. So when we update something in the inventory, it's going to actually tell this grid to update itself, basically, which is going to go through, clear all the children, and repopulate the inventory. This is just saying, hey, whenever it's letting the container component know to let this widget know when it updates. And so when it updates, we're just going to refresh the grid, which is going to go through, clear all the children, and respawn all the items in the grid because, hey, something's been updated, something's been changed. Cool. So let's go into our UIManager component, and we will create a custom event for, actually, let's make a couple of functions, which will be enter UI. These are functions we'll use a lot, so we might as well create functions out of them. These are logic we'll use a lot, so we might as well create functions out of them. We'll get player controller, set show mouse cursor to true. Get player controller and set game, set input mode to game and UI. And we'll drag the end widget to focus. We'll drag it right here to enter UI. And in exit UI, we will get player controller, set show mouse cursor to false. And we will set input mode to game only. And let's go into our player display widget. We will add our player inventory screen, and we will anchor it to the left. Let's see, anchor it right there. Where is it? It's right there. I think the alignment for these is going to be 0. Is it 0? Yeah, 0. Okay, yeah, 0, and then just do 0.5 for the Y. And I'm going to grab a spacer. And I'm just going to put it. Oh, actually, let's get a horizontal box. Throw it on our canvas and say player inventory horizontal box. Drag our player inventory in there. And now we're going to have to do what we did to our player inventory to this. Put 0, 0. The alignment is going to be 0 and 0.5. And then I'm going to add a spacer right there, right before the player inventory. And I'm going to maybe put it to 150 or 100 actually. There we go. And that'll just make sure it's off the left side of the screen a little bit. And if we go into, let's rename these to player inventory grid. And this one, player HUD. Cool. Oh, and let's make that collapse by default. Oops, collapsed. And if we go into our UIManager component, we can say display player inventory. And then we can get our player display widget. We can get our player inventory grid. We can set the visibility to visible. And on begin play, let's actually get the player character. Get component by class. Get the item container component. And promote that to a variable. We'll call it player inventory container component. Because we're the only way we're going to be displaying this this widget is if it's the player's inventory. So we can hard code what container goes with it. So in the player inventory grid, we want to, what was it? Get item grid. No, what is this? This is screen player inventory. What was it called? Screen. Sorry, I'm looking for the widget for the widget screen player inventory. Oh, wow. I did that. What did I do that on? Oh, that was, okay, I got you. We didn't add it yet. So let's go to our screen, our player screen, our player inventory screen, and add a border. Draw it as none. Get an overlay. And then we can get our item grid and throw it in there. I'm just going to zero out all the padding. Cool. And I'm going to say player inventory grid. And then in our UIManager component, we can say get player inventory grid, and we want to do build item grid. And get our player inventory container component. And then we want to enter UI. And the widget to focus is just going to be this player display widget ref. And then we want to hide player inventory and duplicate these two right here. And set it to collapsed and then exit UI. Oh, I'm sorry. This is actually player inventory grid. Yeah, that's what we want to set to collapse. And let's actually go into our widgets, our player display, and actually rename this to player inventory screen. And then we'll rename our player HUD to player HUD screen. Cool. And if we go into our third person character, we can debug key I. And this is and this is why I made the UI widget manager component, because we can just get player controller, get component by class. From anywhere, we'll be able to access all our widgets and stuff. And we wanted what? Display player inventory. Let's make a flip-flop right here. And the first time we'll display it. The second time we will hide it. And if we press play, oops. Oh, player inventory screen. It's because I renamed the widgets, so it's giving me a hard time. Should be good. Hit play. If we hit I, there's our inventory. Now the space between them is a little much. Let's go into the item grid. We can change the alignment to left and top. Let's see what that does. There we go. And then from there, we can say slot padding, maybe 5. Actually got this working pretty good, but our scroll box is not showing up. So we actually need to, I totally messed up and put the size box on the grid panel, and we really need to put the size box on the scroll box. So I'm going to Control X to delete the grid panel, or cut the grid panel, click on the scroll box, and then Control V it to paste it. And then I'm going to right click on the scroll box, wrap with size box. I'm going to edit the width and height to 750, 750. And let's see if that works. So let's go to our third person character, go to item container. Let's say 35 items, press I, and there we go. We have our scroll box, and it's like this because this space, it's because of the size box that it's like that. So let's go maybe 600. Well, one sec. It's because we have it's like that because we have the row to 5 and then 35. So it was leaving all that space, but let's just go back to 25. And let's see. Yeah, there we go. But if we end up, where is it? Third person. If we end up with, say, 30. So let's go 600 by 600. There we go. And now we have this right here. We can even probably go back to 25 now. Okay, let's just leave it at 30, actually. Sorry. Cool. All right, and let's see how it works if we pick up some items. So if we pick up items, boom, hit I, there we go. There's our item, 45. And you see, the only thing is the corners kind of getting cut off. We might have bent this. So if we go to our item and we go to we just click on this W item, let's look for those variables we had here. Yeah. Okay, let's do the rounded corner to 555 so it doesn't cut off our quantity. Let's see. Pick up all those. There we go. And we should be able to just give this some padding. Oops, go to the designer. We can give this secondary text some padding, maybe 5. There we go, perfect. Yeah, guys, sorry, I was having trouble with the quantity and I couldn't figure out what was going on, but so it's going to be, when you subtract current quantity from max stack size, that is not the new quantity, because then that'll just put the new quantity as like, whatever that number is. That's the number you can add to current quantity, and that's the new quantity. That should work. Oh, wait. new quantity. There we go. Cool. So these two I put as 7 and 46. So it should be over 50 and it's not letting me. Cool. And let's just make sure the drop is working. So 1. Oh, well, I guess I could look at what I have first. There we go. Cool. There we go. Awesome. Okay, awesome. That's a great start. We got a grid, an item, and it's looking good so far. The next time we'll work on, I'll show you guys how we can easily make a hotbar with a few adjustments to this same setup, and we can make a hotbar with and drag and drop. We'll do drag and drop and a hotbar next time. And if you guys want anything else, just let me know in the comments. And I'm sorry, this episode took a lot longer than expected because we had a blizzard in the southern United States. I live in Louisiana, and we had an actual blizzard. It's the first blizzard in 100 years. So it took us, the city shut down for a week and a half. So, but now that we're through that, hopefully the episodes will come a lot faster. And I'm a little under weather, so excuse me. Just bear with me. But yeah, hopefully this helps you guys out, and let me know what you guys think, and I'll catch you in the next one. Appreciate it.